My name is Jeremy Tunnell, and I am a writer, facilitator, and storyteller who works with individuals and groups on understanding our relationship with algorithms, social feeds, and our digital world, and providing tools in order to bring coherence and resilience back into their lives. This is a short snippet of a training that we did at University of Washington main campus.
Back in the 1970s, when author and MIT lecturer Donella Meadows began to try and translate this concept of systems that was coming out of cybernetics and out of computer science, and she wanted to translate it into real-world application, she wrote a book called Thinking in Systems that's a very mechanistic way of looking at systems. She literally talked about the concept. She used infographics and talked about the concepts of flow and valves and this idea that that there are loops involved, and she was trying to communicate this idea. We've come a long way from that mechanistic concept, and so when we're talking about feedback loops, we're talking about a dynamic of interconnection, because in order for it to either affect you, or you have control over it, or you experience it, it's obviously connected to you in some way, shape, or form. So feedback loops happen all over the place. They happen in nature, right? So let's talk about the hydro cycle. Where did this rain start? Where did it come from? The Pacific, yes. And it's sitting in the ocean, right? And how did it get out of the ocean? Evaporation. And that evaporation has a feedback loop involved, heat and cold, right? And so that evaporation rises the moisture up, and it begins to move, and as it moves, it's coming into the coastline, and when it hits the coastline, it has to go up in elevation, and what happens? It turns back into water. It condenses and turns back into water, falls on the ground, absorbs into the ground, or goes into the system, and where does it end up? Back out to the ocean. That's a feedback loop. It's full of feedback loops. It's feedback loops embedded within feedback loops. Next slide, please. So how do feedback loops relate to us? How are feedback loops related to human interaction? Well, feedback loops are the way they operate is basically, they're a very simple word, inquiry. That's a feedback loop. So if we want to engage with a feedback loop, all we have to do is ask a question. That's it. Next slide, please. The other kind of loop, and there's many kinds of loops, right? There's many kinds of loops, but the other kind of loop we're going to talk about is a reactionary or a reinforcing loop. And that is answers. That is when we have such certainty about what we believe and what we think and and how the world works, and this is how it works, and it works no other way. That's a reactionary or reinforcing loop. And we're always looking in order to try and reinforce that loop. It doesn't have any inquiry whatsoever. Next slide, please. And so in personal narratives, when we are working with other people, and I'm set in my position, and you are set in your position, like my father-in-law and my wife, if they're both set in this position, what happens to that relationship? Imagine if my father doubled down.
Oh, dang.
Tripled down. And Jerry doubles down and triples down.
That wouldn't be good.
Would she be seeing my father-in-law any longer? No. And if she did, would it be fun? No, it'd be miserable. It'd be terrible. How do I know? Because she doesn't see my mother. Different story. But that feedback loop is broken because people double down. Not you, darling. People double down. Next slide, please. How does this work with devices? How are these devices feeding that reinforcing loop? The algorithm's designed for it. It's literally a feedback loop, not a reinforcing loop, because it's always asking questions, always. What do you like? What are you looking at? What are you not looking at? What do you scroll past? What do you subscribe to? What do you share? What makes you react and comment? What kind of words are you using when you react and comment? Oh, now I can read your face because I have the technology to do it. Why does your face do that? Oh, I know why your face does that. How come you do that all the time? It's always asking questions. It never needs to have certainty because it always wants to find ways to occupy you, your time, your attention, your emotional state. Next slide, please. That's cognitive dissonance, or a form of it. So we can skip this one, same thing. Now, what about within ourselves, right? There's that dialogue that can happen within our own mind. How many of you recognize that dialogue within yourself? Yeah. How many of you maybe don't have a dialogue? Maybe you see images. Mm-hmm. You know, right? Some people see images. Different brains work different ways. But our brain is always operating, right? It's a problem solver. That's what it wants to do. And so when we engage ourselves with inquiry, we're engaging with ourselves in feedback loops. Why do I feel this way? Why do I think that? Why would I want to do something like that? What's my motivation here? How am I inspired in this moment? Now you're having a feedback loop with yourself. And journaling is a great way to do that because it gets that conversation, that dialogue, those images out of your head, and it gets them into the real world where you're now having a conversation with you in a way that's not all up here. Next slide, please. So that's how we engage with feedback loops within ourselves, is inquiry. Very simple. You can do it through journaling, you can do it through drawing, you can do it through dialogue with another person. There's all kinds of ways in order to engage in feedback loops. When I'm having that very good interaction between another person, as you were just a little bit ago, how much of that was listening in a state of inquiry, in a state of curiosity, right? You're not just sitting there like, what have we got, 2 minutes? Right? Next slide, please. Oh, well, before we do that, that little dot in the middle is what we call the singularity of inquiry. So what makes a reactionary loop an immediate feedback loop is by passing through the singularity of inquiry. All you got to do is ask a question. That's it. Those moments that you are absolutely activated and you are ready to double down, what if you asked a question in that moment? Why do I feel this way? Is this worth my time? How is this serving me? Next slide, please. So before we do this, I want to go back to those 3 lines that you drew in your journal. If you just flip that open. And what I'd like you to do is right in the center, right where they meet, I want you to put a heart or a star or a circle, whatever you'd like. That's you. That's you. That's you in alignment with whatever's sacred. That's you in alignment with time as it moves and you move through it. That's you in alignment with systems as they are out here, moving through you into the systems beyond. You are that 3-dimensional point in space-time. And so when we do this alo and ha, I want you to imagine yourself, and you can place your hand on your heart if you'd like. I'd like to imagine yourself as that 3-dimensional point in space-time. And where those 3 points meet, it is always present. Always in the present. So here we go. Alo. Ha. Alo. Ha. Alo. Ha. You know, and we try and do this for each other, but so Jerry will come out of her office sometimes and she'll be activated and she'll be all like, did you see what was just signed? And I just read that it's going to mean this, and it's going to mean this, and it's going to mean this, and it's going to mean this. Okay, I hear you. Did you go to the source? Did you read it? Because if you're reading what somebody else wrote about it and what they believe it's going to do, then you are leaning into somebody else that you don't know idea of this thing. So what's the source? Find the source. Inquire. What's the source? Can I find it and can I read it myself? Can I make that interpretation on my own? So that feeds into our paradigm and our perspective. Next slide, please. Paradigm is the frame in which we look through the world, right? It is built for us for the most part. We don't have a whole lot of control over paradigm. So paradigm could be I grew up in the foothills of Northern California. That community to this day is like 95%, you know, on the census is 95% white. My nephew graduated from that community. You could see that actually in my ancestral photos. You know, my nephew graduated from that community, and I remember, you know, when he was about 14 or 15, like having this conversation with him. You know, he just wasn't sure these conversations that Jerry and I were having with people, and he didn't understand them. And so I had to bring it down to him. I'd be like, where do you come from? You know, who are our people? What are you surrounded by? These all play into paradigm. The faith that my parents raised me in. The fact that my parents divorced. That's something that I don't have any control over. But it affects my paradigm. It affects the frame in which I view the world. So Issy, hit the button 3 times fast.
3 times.
One more time. It was a frame. Yeah, see how it flashed? I built that. Yeah. Yeah. Wait until the next one. So perspective is the lenses that fit within that frame. Perspective is largely made up by you. It's made up by your successes. It's made up by your failures. It's made up by the things that you know that you read, that you consume, that you participate in. It's made up by the civic groups that you're involved in. That's perspective. And so when we engage feedback loops with perspective, we're able to shift those pretty quick. And they don't need to make grand changes, but they should always be evolving, constantly be evolving. In fact, you can pretty much tell if you are engaging in feedback loops whether or not your perspective is always evolving or not. That's what Jerry meant in the beginning, that we speak in draft. If your perspective is stuck, you're not asking questions. Next slide, please. Real fast. Too fast. But you get the idea. Yeah. Yeah. See, there it is. It's so good. Yeah. Okay, one more slide, please. So, well, one more. I guess another one. Okay. So here's a great perspective exercise, right? So what we've got here, and it's actually hard to see because of these lights, but there's a cylinder, a 3-dimensional cylinder, sitting, you know, right above the words here. And on one side, where the blue light is, it's a square, and on the other side, where the yellow light is, it's a circle. What makes the difference between that 2-dimensional square and circle is the position, the perspective from which the light hits the sphere, or the cylinder. So when the light hits the cylinder at the round part on the top, it's a circle. And when it hits it from the side, it's a square. It's the same object. Walk around these objects as much as you can through inquiry. Look as far around these objects as you can, because if you're not, you're only seeing a two-dimensional view. And what are you? You are a three-dimensional pinpoint in space-time.
I'm curious about the connection between perspective, paradigm, and listening.
Great question.
And if someone says to you, you're not listening,
Yeah, ooh.
how do you then respond to that with those three things in mind?
So the question is curious about how paradigm and perspective work with listening. And when somebody says to you, you're not listening, how does that work within this structure? First and foremost, when somebody tells me you're not listening, most of the time, I'm probably in my inside thinking, yes, I am. And so what is that? That seems like a pretty solid answer to me. So it means I have to move to a place of, wait, am I not listening?
Inquiry.
You know, am I interested in listening? Should I be listening? You know, at what point am I pushing into and leaning into defending myself, and at what point am I pushing in and leaning into relationship? So that's the first thing that comes to mind. You know, when we're talking about listening, the other piece to that is finding empathy in their paradigm and perspective through listening. They're telling a story. And that's the story that their three-dimensional pinpoint in space-time has traveled. Get curious about it. Inquiry is not just about asking questions, it's also about having a position of inquiry within yourself.